Let's get back then to the conversation tonight as we unpack the proceedings of the day. Started off a little bit earlier on with a postponed motion of no confidence against President Cyril Ramaphosa. But of course, during that roll call, we've seen from the late hours of the afternoon up until this point, a no confidence motion against President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet. Dr. TK Pooe as well as Levy Ndou are joining us now to help us in this conversation. First and foremost, TK, let me start with you. Do we have an unaccountable executive power crisis in this country?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think we've just got a crisis of leadership, and this goes both ways, because I understand that the motion was about looking at cabinet, specifically speaking about the DA rather than the ATM's motion. But I think it's an issue of leadership across the board, because even in the motion, the opposition, both opposition parties they put forward, the question really does seem to come to the fore is, what are you trying to win now, which you could not win at election time? And it's almost a question of, I call it the island of relevancy, which is to say, in the absence of this vote of no confidence, why aren't more people, why aren't more South Africans actually saying, you know what, Democratic Alliance or ex-opposition party, you are so right, we're willing to give you your votes. So for me, it's just a question of leadership across the board. There is no question that the ANC as a political party and also as government is failing. But this failing surely should have been taken to the ballot box, and they should have been changed there. And then all these political parties that are calling for change or on a vote of no confidence should have won there. So for me, it really is what I always say, that South Africa's problem is that we just really lack leaders across the board. It's not an issue of the ANC only. It's a question of the quality of opposition we also have.
Yeah. One would argue and say, TK, what you're talking about is vertical accountability, elections, but what about horizontal accountability? Things like Parliament and the work of Parliament and motion of no confidence and things like scorecards, for example, or performance agreements, which in this particular instance don't seem to be working or at least resulting in anything. There is no marriage between, for example, the performance of the Ministry of Employment and the results that come out. If we are seeing results from State South Africa that says the employment trajectory is going in the wrong direction, surely that means there's some poor performance somewhere and somebody needs to be held accountable.
Well, for me, this thing is not a question of now. If this is the case, this goes all the way back to, one might even say, the 2008 period, where the ANC has consistently been doing an abysmal job at assisting employment to be created. So again, it goes back to the issue of, you're asking me as a citizen and as an analyst, how do we change that? Well, according to our system, there's not really much we can do other than an election. And in the absence of the election, we rely on opposition political parties to not only raise issues, because I think South African opposition parties are great at raising stuff. It's what they're really great at. But I think we're asking for more, which is to say, we've seen this for the last 2 decades, speaking exclusively to the issue of economic development in South Africa. If this then is your sole issue, why don't more people trust you as the opposition in other areas to say, listen, you guys are speaking such a hard truth that we're going to do more than just simply agree with you. We're going to vote. Because I get the issue of in-between and maybe horizontal accountability, but we have to look at what our system allows us to do. If maybe the ANC was under 50%, it might be a different story. But I like speaking about the facts that are currently at the table, which is they are above 50%. And in them being above 50%, you need to play what's there, which is, can you convince even ANC members to see the relevance of what you're saying?
Yeah, we'll come back a little bit more and pose that question. What's the motivation then if clearly this is unlikely to be successful? But Levy, let's bring you in here. Would you agree that South Africa lacks a direct mechanism to hold officials at least horizontally accountable for poor performance?
Well, I think there are a few processes that are established by government for the purposes of accountability. Number one, you have got parliamentary committees wherein ministers go and account with their departments on the activities that they're actually doing. They do it quarterly and, of course, annually. And in all these parliamentary committees, members of all political parties are represented, and that is where ministers are accountable to these people. At the same time, you also have got parliamentary constituent offices, wherein members of parliament are able to provide a brief and feedback to their constituencies about the work that they do on a regular basis. Of course, on this one, you have got a lot of MPs who actually do not go to their constituent offices because they will provide as many reasons as possible. At that level, indeed, you have got some level of accountability. At the same time, you have got different political parties who appear to be frustrated by the cabinet that is in place, and all they do is that they would want to use whatever strategies available to be able to take them out of office. But equally, those that are in power should not only take this negative, they can also take it positively, especially the president, to say that if some people are saying there are individuals within your cabinet that do not seem to be performing well, maybe it can also be time for reflection, not only for the president, but also for the ministers that are actually serving in the cabinet. I'm aware that those that are not performing are actually speaking to themselves now that maybe it is time for them to improve and do things better. Because in the march that we saw this morning, arranged by the Democratic Alliance, you could see certain names there being mentioned of ministers that they feel should be removed. And for me, that's why I say they should actually take this positively and start to do things differently.
Yeah. So do you think there is truth in the assertion that there are some poor appointments to key positions? And let's be frank here, maybe one of the ones that I certainly have seen is a motion of no confidence in the police minister in particular from the Democratic Alliance. Is that a poor appointment in that key position?
Well, if you look at the performance of the police in South Africa and the events that have been unfolding, obviously politicians will have to point a finger at the Minister of Police. And for me, the Minister of Police also has to take this very positively and say, I need to improve because I'm labeled as one of those that are not performing well. There has always been an outcry related to the Department of Labor. And I would expect those that are running the department also to be able to do things differently, reflect and ensure that they do not attract this kind of criticism that they're also getting. Another aspect that for me is critical is the appointments that are being made by different state departments and having people that do not have sufficient capacity to be able to deliver as expected. And whether you are a hard-working minister or not, as long as you don't have right people in the right positions in the department, you will always face this kind of criticism because there will not be any form of movement from the department.
Then, DK, let's talk broadly about what you're raising. I mean, if you are saying, I don't know if you're going that far, to say the motion of confidence is meaningless if the party like the Democratic Alliance would fail to convince even ANC members or even convince members of society to give them more votes, then what is the motivation for proposing a no-confidence motion, even if you know that the likelihood of a positive result here is slim to none? I mean, in history, approximately only 5% of no-confidence motion have resulted in the termination of government in the world.
Yeah, no, I'll answer it in two ways. And I'm glad that you actually finished off with the statistical approach, because I think in the UK, the last time it worked was in 1979, which really tells you something, because Britain has had a lot of bad prime ministers and cabinets. So I think then the issue really is, and I call it again, it's just a simple phrase called islands. It's an island of relevancy. In the absence of this vote of no confidence, what do we really know that the Democratic Alliance is up to? Yes, we know that they're governing the Western Cape, and there are talks that the Western Cape does very well, and sometimes I think they need to be commended for that, but I think if you really dig deeper, it's well in certain areas more than anything else. For me, if you really had to say, look, TK, more than criticizing the DA, why don't you come up with something new? I'd say, let's look at a new system, right? When people really, and I'm sure Mr. Levy Ndou, who's probably taught human resource management, would know about this, people perform according to issues of expectation and money, right? Why don't we adopt the system that works in Singapore, which is to say, let's set a target for each and every ministry, including government, and this is going to go down all the way to officials, and say, listen, if you fail to meet X criteria for your ministry and for government, we're going to actually hit your pocket. Which is to say, poor performance by your department, by your ministry, will result in a 25% loss in your salary, as in real hard-earned money. That for me really says, okay, this is something new. This is something in the interim of an election, something we can really create a system around. Because I've always said this, that I think our ministers, vis-a-vis what they are, and way above what most South Africans would consider to be a minimum wage. I think actually it's overinflated. There I agree with the DA. But I think they should also go to opposition party, which is to say, if you fail to convince South Africans more than you not being voted for, let's say 25% of you. So for every poor performance from a ministry, from opposition political party, let's take 25% away. Then I guarantee you'll start to, you'll start to see people really performing, because it's really hitting at the issue of their monies. And I think that's where we need to start going, to say, listen, you're an overprivileged bunch of people in parliament. You're not really representative of most people in South Africa. You got there because of your political parties. Not because you're great, simply because you have a political party and a vehicle. And this goes across the board, opposition and the governing party. So in the absence of us being able to unelect you, let's really do something and say, listen, put your money where your mouth is. You always talk about serving the greater good, serving South Africa. If that's the case, let's all agree that going forward now, poor performance in a year-on-year basis is going to be punished by us saying you're going to lose money, starting with 25% of your overall gross, and it'll go down every year. So by the time maybe we get to the election, if you've been a good performing government, maybe we give you a 5% increase. If you've been poor, then you'll also be financially poor, and then we can simply just get rid of you. That for me is how we go forward and move away from issues of votes of no confidence, which really do nothing at all.
Yeah. Levi, what's your feeling on this? What's the motivation for the proposing a no confidence motion if we know that the likelihood of a positive outcome is really very slim? Others have said it's an unsuccessful success in that what it does, one, it highlights the voice of the opposition, but also maybe it might increase their loyalty with the electorate to say, oh, well, you are able to hold those in power accountable.
Well, Thabo, members of the opposition, as I indicated earlier, have got a responsibility to sit in parliamentary committees and ensure that there is accountability on the part of the different departments. And I think it's also time, if I want to add on what TK said, that we need to know exactly what is it that some members of the opposition are actually doing to ensure that ministers are accountable. I was listening to the proceedings that there are some members of the opposition who were saying that I've been in this parliament for about 3 terms and I've not seen any movement. But I wanted to ask the same members, what is it that they've been doing to ensure that there is proper accountability? But if one has to come directly to your question, I think there could be a few reasons why there could be a motion of no confidence that will not be successful. Firstly, opposition parties would use this as an opportunity to be able to identify wrong things that are actually taking place within government. They don't appear to be having sufficient access to the electorate, or they are not able to command sufficient people that they can convince outside parliament. So the strategy is to call for a motion of no confidence, knowing that a lot of South Africans are going to be watching, so that they are able to identify all the weaknesses happening in government. Another thing that opposition parties, for me, would then also try to do would be to say they would always want to portray themselves as parties that can be able to provide an alternative better than what is actually happening. But even though you have this kind of situations, you still then require political parties themselves to say to South Africans, we are there for 5 years, we are an opposition, we'll make sure that we raise issues that are close to the hearts of South Africans, but in doing so, we will also be able to provide an alternative after the elections. Because when you only see motions that are being raised and failing, some people start seeing this as a waste of time and resources by our elected representatives.
Yeah. TK has already come up with one way. He thinks we can bring about greater accountability and responsiveness from the officials, hit them in the pockets, he says, and the purpose of dance. What's your suggestion, Levi?
I think what we should do is to have a system where not every proposal for a motion of no confidence should actually pass. The reason being that if you look at the main reasons in the Constitution for the removal, for an example, of the president, they are clearly outlined. And if you look at the motions of confidence that we have had in South Africa in the past 10 years to 12 years or so, they would not necessarily be hold sufficient weight for them to be presented in Parliament. And I think it is time also for those that are our public representatives to actually take us seriously and ensure that indeed when there is a motion of no confidence, everybody else will be convinced that it is in the best interest of all of us and indeed it has value.
Yeah, but how is that going to help us with the responsiveness and accountability of the officials? I'm saying, what do we need to do to get greater accountability from those who are already in power?
If one has to take it to the presidency, you need the president who is not going to accommodate anyone who does not seem to be able to perform as expected. Ministers in South Africa sign performance agreements with the president, and of course, if they are not performing as expected, the president must be seen to be taking action against those people. At the same time, you also need ministers themselves who must be honest with all of us and say, this responsibility seems to be bigger for me. I cannot be able to perform. And Mr. President, please relieve me of my responsibilities. That is what I expect from a leader who is patriotic, who wants to see progress in South Africa, rather than staying in the office and actually do nothing for the population.